Good evening. I'm Louis Plachowski of the Citizens Exploratory Committee for Health and Safety. We are interested in finding out more about the solid waste incinerator that the Denver Zoo intends to install in the zoo in City Park. We're also interested in encouraging the City of Denver to adopt a true zero waste program. We are very lucky to have Dr. Paul Connett, a scientist and recognized expert on incineration and zero waste, with us this evening. He is going to give us information about incineration that we might find useful in trying to understand the health and safety considerations of the solid waste incinerator that the Denver Zoo intends to install in the zoo in City Park. Dr. Connett is Professor Emeritus in Environmental Chemistry at St. Lawrence University in Canton, New York. He received a BA with honors from Cambridge University in England and a PhD in chemistry from Dartmouth College in New Hampshire. Dr. Connett's research on waste management has taken him to 49 states in the United States, 7 provinces in Canada, and 63 other countries. He was co-editor of the newsletter Waste Not with his wife Ellen from 1988 to 2000. He has co-authored 6 peer-reviewed and published articles on dioxin and numerous other articles on waste management. In the past 30 years, he has given approximately 2,500 public presentations. Ralph Nader said, "Dr. Connett is the only person I know who can make waste interesting." His most recent publication on waste is the book, The Zero Waste Solution. Dr. Connett has also co-produced over 50 videotapes on waste management and a 10-part series on the dangers of dioxin. We will have a drawing at the end of Dr. Connett's talk for a copy of his book, The Zero Waste Solution, so be sure to have your name on a sign-in sheet to be eligible for the drawing. I could go on for quite a while listing Dr. Connett's honors, publications, and achievements, but I would rather hear what he has to say to the citizens of Denver about incineration and hope for our future zero waste. Dr. Connett has asked that you please hold any questions until he has finished his presentation. There'll be plenty of time for Q&A at the end. We are going to tape Dr. Connett's presentation, and we will make it available on our blog, zerowastedenver.wordpress.com. Thank you, and please welcome Dr. Connett. There we go. Let's see how that works.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. I spent half my life in England and half in the United States. My greatest claim to fame, I believe, is that I played soccer with John Cleese. So if at times things sound a little crazy, you know where it came from.
Okay.
This is going to be almost an encyclopedia, and I hope via that videotape you'll be able to use the information here in many different ways throughout the Denver region and beyond, for communities that are fighting incinerators, communities that are fighting gasification plants, communities that want to go on the positive and develop zero waste solutions, and also the issues, the big issues, the big picture. So, here we go. The reason I'm here, by the way, all my work is pro bono. I don't charge for my presentations. I'm very happy to do it and feel very privileged to do this around the world. So, as a way of introduction, I spent the last 19 years, because my wife twisted my arm, fighting water fluoridation. First as a professor of chemistry, specializing in environmental chemistry and toxicology, and then as director of the Fluoride Action Network. And I published a book on this with 2 other scientists called The Case Against Fluoride, 80 pages of references This was published in 2010. I really hoped it would raise the level of debate because the proponents of fluoridation treat us like flat earth, crazy people, stupid, Looney Tunes. That's why I didn't want the issue when my wife tried to persuade me to look into it. But it's far from the case. We have the science on our side. And I'm here in Denver because yesterday I testified before the Denver Water Board. There were 3 people opposed to fluoridation who testified. They gave us a total of 30 minutes. And 3 from the other side, including the former acting head of the Center for Disease Control. So we're up against the top guns. So I have some postcards here. If you would like to join in this little foray, find out about the issue first, convince yourselves that I'm not a lunatic. If you can get a copy of this book from your library, read it, and you will be absolutely shocked. It's insane. Let me just give you one piece of information. There's not one single substance in the body, one biological molecule or process that requires fluoride, and yet we're drinking it every day. We now know that fluoride is neurotoxic. It's absolutely insane to put a neurotoxic substance into our kids' drinking water. When you consider that regulatory agencies are performing somersaults to try to remove mercury and lead from our children's lives because they're neurotoxic, and then at the same time these same agencies are supporting putting this substance in our drinking water. Enough about that. Okay, now let's get to the waste issue. Between 1985 and 2000, my wife and I edited this weekly newsletter called Waste Not for the group Work on Waste USA. That's when I met Joan Seaman the first time back in the 1980s. And we helped citizens groups defeat approximately 300 incinerators in the United States. And they've only built one trash incinerator in the United States since 1997. It's a dead industry, mass burn incineration. Now, to move to the positive. In 1998, I shot a videotape at the California Resource Recovery Association conference. That's one of the biggest recycling organizations in the world. And in this conference in San Francisco, they focused on this new idea of zero waste, and I was invited there to go and make a videotape. I'd set up a little group called Grassroots and Global Video to make videotapes that could give ammunition to the grassroots organizations. And you can see a copy of it today at our website, AmericanHealthStudies.org. And since in this videotape I interviewed all the leading proponents of zero waste on those days, and it stands up pretty well today. But I was very excited by what I heard, and since then, and particularly in Italy, I've been promoting zero waste avidly. I've been to Italy 65 times. Those are many of the cities I've spoken to in Italy from top to bottom. It's a wonderful country, absolutely fabulous grassroots activists there who I love dearly. One of my closest friends now is the gentleman in the middle, Rossano Ercolini, who's a school teacher, and he's organized nearly all of my trips. And the woman on the right is Patricia Lasciotto from Trapani in Sicily. And I remember her so vividly too, because Trapani was the first community I spoke to in Italy that was not fighting an incinerator. They wanted to hear me talk about zero waste because they wanted their community to move in a sustainable direction. And it was very interesting to witness this transition from the politics of no incineratore, no discarica, sì rifiuti zero, sì sustainability. You can only go so far with negative energy, trying to stop things. You really need something in your life to say yes to. And zero waste has so many things that you can say yes to, as you'll hear at later on. Anyway, the three of us got together and we wrote this book called Rifiuti Zero, A Revolution in Progress. And a year later, Rossano won the Goldman Prize. He was the first person from Europe ever to win the Goldman Prize for the environment. It's the equivalent of a Nobel Prize for the environmental activists, at least. And he gave a wonderful presentation, acceptance speech. And then we translated this and greatly expanded it with lots and lots of photographs from around the world to produce this book, The Zero Waste Solution. And the subtitle of this is Untrashing the Planet One Community at a Time. I think, with like many other things, I am not hoping for big government to do anything. Big governments, by and large, are captured by the corporations, and the corporations are looting this planet. They're looters. The frackers and the Monsantos are looting our planet. And the only people that can stop that are people in the grassroots organizations, people who care about their kids, their grandkids, their communities, and their neighborhoods. So this is just one place where we're going to see those engines firing. But we need it desperately. Fortunately for us, we don't have to win everybody completely. What we need is to get case studies, to get models, model villages, model small towns, big cities, and so on. And then when other people get the message, they've got a blueprint to copy. Now, the foreword to the book was written by Jeremy Irons, English film star, who you may have seen, and he hosted this movie called Trashed. And it depicts the horrors of incineration and landfill around the world. Perhaps the most horrific sequence in this movie was what we're doing to the oceans. We're putting 9 million tons of plastics every year into the oceans. Now that's an albatross. An albatross flies around the Pacific, literally thousands of miles, capturing food and bringing it back to the Leeward Islands, where it feeds its babies with the food that is captured through regurgitation. Except the problem today is it's not feeding its young fish, cuttlefish, but plastic bottle caps, orange and red and so on. I saw a videotape when I was in Hawaii, which was shot on the Leeward Islands, and it showed these parent albatrosses literally feeding their babies plastic bottle tops. It was the most revolting image that I've seen. If you want an image to summarize what we, brilliant, clever, wonderful human beings, have done to this planet and the other creatures on this planet, just watch that videotape. Anyway, we've done that. Here's an outline of my talk. I'm going to talk, first of all, about sustainability and waste management, or rather resource management. Then I'm going to talk about the arguments against conventional incinerators and gasifying incinerators. Then the arguments against this particular project, this Denver Zoo gasification project. And then finally, I'm going to be talking about a zero-waste solution for Denver. And I must say, Joan has been sending me a lot of information, very helpful indeed, and Bridget. I must admit, when trying to grapple with this rinky-dink little operation that they're talking about for the zoo, it's really involved such a change of gears. Because a few weeks ago, I was in Hong Kong, where they're trying to build a 3,000-ton trash incinerator in the Hong Kong harbor. Now, they're going to build it on an island which is protected, a protected island. But they've got a little dodge. They're not actually building it on the island. They're building it 10 meters away from the island. 10 meters, 30 feet from a protected island. Well, how could you do that? How could you build it 30 meters away? Well, the answer is they're going to build an artificial island on which they're going to then build this 3,000-ton trash incinerator. It will be a huge monster. It will dominate the skyline. And the place where they're going to build the artificial island is right on top of the breeding grounds of an endangered species, a porpoise. Its preferred breeding ground is right there. It is the most preposterous project I think I've witnessed recently. And then, just a few days ago, I was in Barbados, where they're entertaining building a 1,000-ton-a-day plasma arc gasifying incinerator, burning 550 tons of waste and 450 tons a day of king grass biomass. And this is on an island where they could supply all their energy needs with wind and solar, photovoltaics. They got an enormous amount of sunshine, all those roofs there. And they say they're going to do this to get off landfills, when in fact they could get off landfills with the zero waste policy. So you imagine the size then. I've got to come down now to thinking of why we should be concerned about a 5 or 10 ton a day poop burner, plus whatever else they're going to shove in it. So part one, sustainability and resource management. Sustainability. We would need 4 planets if everybody consumed like an American. We would need 2 planets if everybody consumed like the average European. And meanwhile, we have India and China copying our consumption patterns. Right now, China is building between 150 and 300 trash incinerators. Now, this is absolutely mind-boggling because I've never seen a more polluted country. I didn't see anything. All I saw was smog in China. And to build incinerators, massive incinerators in Shanghai and Beijing and Guangzhou and elsewhere, on top of that pollution, is staggering. But fortunately, the grassroots are organizing, and there are massive demonstrations against doing this. And I'm going to predict right now, within a few years, China will be leading the zero waste movement on our planet. That's really positive news, I think. But meanwhile, something has clearly got to change. And the best place to start that change, in my view, is with waste. Because we all make waste every day. And all the time we're making waste, we're part of a non-sustainable way of living on this planet. We're part of a process which, if we do nothing, there will be no civilization that we would want, that we come to recognize and expect to give to our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren by the end of this century. Something has to dramatically change. And I think it's tantalizing as an activist that the start of that change is in all our hands, in all our fingers, if we get good political leadership. But that's such a damn rare thing these days that we might be hoping for too much. But the leadership, as I've said, has to come from the grassroots, local leadership, local politicians. But our task is simple to say. We have to convert a linear economy into a circular economy. This is how this was depicted by an English operation called RAP. If you look on the left, there's the linear economy, raw materials, production, use, and then residual waste. And then on the right is the circular economy, which you bring about by imposing feedback loops on this. Well, I've reproduced that. We have this linear economy. It begins with the extraction of raw materials, shipping them halfway around the world, manufacturing products from those raw materials, consuming, over-consuming those products, and then chucking everything away, and we call it waste. And we call development, you're more developed, the quicker that process takes place. The quicker you can convert raw materials into waste, the more developed you are. Now, I want to look at the global impacts of this linear economy, and it's sort of catalogue of all the dreadful things that we know is going on. Well, first of all, we used an enormous amount of energy in extraction of raw materials, more energy in transport, and then more energy in manufacture, and more energy in transport. And please remember that energy input, because it becomes very significant when we talk about incinerators or waste-to-energy facilities. And in the process, of course, we're ripping down rainforests, we're extinguishing species, we're eliminating wetlands, we are causing an enormous amount of air pollution up here, and water pollution, and the pollution of the oceans, reduction in arable land, reduction in the availability of clean water. Water is going to be more valuable in oil in years to come. The production of solid waste, 70 times more solid waste is produced here and here, 70 times here, than you see over here. So each can of waste that you see on the sidewalk, there's 70 cans of waste that's been produced in the extraction and manufacture. Exhaustion of fossil fuels and mineral resources, production of carbon dioxide in all these processes, which is producing global warming, as you're familiar with. So now the question is, how do the different ways we have of handling waste impact this picture? But clearly waste is part of this linear system. So let's have a look at the different ways. Let's start with landfilling. There's the linear economy again. Landfilling. If we bury our waste, we have to go all the way back to the beginning and extract those raw materials and manufacture those products all over again. So there's no movement towards a circular economy. Landfilling is not sustainable. All right, next one. Incineration or gasification. Every time we burn our waste or gasify it and then burn the gas, we have to go back to square one. In addition, we put out toxic air emissions, more carbon dioxide, and we're left with toxic residues. So again, neither incineration nor gasification is a sustainable solution. About time for some good news. If we recycle materials back to industry, we cut out all the impacts of extraction. We eliminate the global impacts of extraction every time we recycle something. And then, even better, if we reuse the whole object, the car, the television, the videotape recorder, whatever, then we cut out both extraction and production impacts. So now you know why reuse is above recycling in the famous trio of R's. Reduce, reuse, recycle. Also, if we compost, we reduce the need for synthetic fertilizer. But in addition, the compost improves soil structure and holds onto carbon, water, and nutrients. Here's some compost. And you notice in there that you've got bits of cellulose, bits of wood. Well, if that went into a gasifier or an incinerator, that would immediately be converted for incineration into carbon dioxide, and eventually in gasification to carbon dioxide. But in the compost, you are holding onto that carbon, you're sequestering that carbon in the layers in the soil for many months or sometimes many years. And there is some extraordinary news from California which you might be heartened to hear. They have found in Marin County, oh, here's the news. The news is that the simplest, cheapest, and quickest solution to fighting global warming may well be applying compost to grazing land. They did this in Marin County. They covered grazing land with 1/2 inch of compost. And within a few years, the amount of carbon that had been stored in the roots of the plants was enormous. And what they think is happening is that the compost is opening up the structure of the soil, allowing the roots of the grass to go deeper and deeper. And all those deep roots are sequestering carbon. So this really is a grassroots solution to climate change. Here it is, a microcosm. This is a cover crop grown near San Francisco, and you can see, there's a lot of carbon being held in these roots. And if you don't use the whole plant, if you don't dig up the roots, but just harvest the top, those roots continue to hold on to that carbon. Now in San Francisco, since 1996, they've composted about 1.2 million tons of organic waste. And that's the equivalent of all the CO2 emissions from all the cars crossing the Bay Bridge in both directions for 3.5 years. So you imagine if every city had a composting program. What if Denver had a composting program like that? You could really make a contribution to fighting global warming. As far as sustainability is concerned, then, every ton that we bury or burn takes us in the opposite direction. Opposite direction. If you built an incinerator tomorrow, 30 years later, you will have moved no closer to sustainability than we are today. Whereas every ton that we compost, every ton that we reuse, every ton that we recycle, and every ton that we avoid unnecessary consumption takes us in the right direction. And in part 4 of my talk, I will give you the details of the 10 steps to zero waste. There they are right now. If you want a little preview and cogitate on it for a moment, it starts with source separation, these 10 fingers. Then it must be followed with door-to-door collection. You probably, I think you have that in Denver already. A composting program, more important in my view than recycling, composting. Then a network of reuse and repair operations around the city, which eventually I would hope to become community centers. Waste reduction initiatives, particularly the pay-as-you-throw system, in which the compostables and recyclables are taken for free, but the residual fraction, the more you make, the more you pay. That economic incentive gets at least 15% reduction. Other economic incentives like banning or taxing bad packaging. Then a very important step, if you're interested in getting close to zero, this can get you to 80% diversion. San Francisco has done that. But if you want to go further, then we need a residual separation facility built in front of the existing landfills so that we can pull out more recyclables, more toxics. We can stabilize the dirty organic fraction, but then introduce into that a zero waste research center where we study our industrial mistakes and ask for better product design, better packaging design. And that leads us to step 9, better industrial design. And finally, the backup landfill that's going to take the currently non-recyclable material, the stabilized dirty organic fraction, but the effort is to reduce that more and more so that by 2020, we're getting too close to that probably, say 2030, we're very close to zero. Okay, so there is a positive message at the end of this. We now switch back into the negative gear, the arguments against incineration and gasifying incinerators. The number one argument is that in the 21st century, we shouldn't be embarking on huge projects which are not sustainable. But the other arguments, number one, they are very expensive, a huge amount of taxpayers' money. 2, they create very few permanent jobs. There's a lot of jobs in building them. Most of the money leaves the community. Unless your community actually manufactures incineration equipment, you're going to have to import it either from other states or in many cases other countries. Now this is one of the most beautiful incinerators in the world in Brescia, Italy. It cost $400 million to build, and it has created just 80 jobs. That's not many jobs for that kind of investment. Incineration is a waste of energy. Remember I said remember this, how much energy we need for extraction and transport and manufacture, and then more transport. None of that energy can be saved with incineration. That's all gone, that embedded energy. But as I've showed you, it can be saved with recycling and reuse. This is what I'm talking about, this energy there. This energy can be saved with recycling, and this energy can be saved with reuse. Now, these figures are pretty stark. A Canadian consulting company, ICF Consulting, compared how much energy you would save with recycling these materials on the left, that's the green column, how much energy you would get if you burnt them to produce electricity. And then in the far column, the ratio of how much more energy you save compared to how much energy you get from burning those materials. And take that PET plastic, that's the plastic of water bottles, 26 times more energy saved by recycling those bottles compared to burning them. So these facilities use this PR vocabulary, waste to energy. The real description is waste of energy. They are waste of energy facilities. They get very excited, everybody very positive. Take that Zudu and get energy. When you build an incinerator, you should wear black. It's like going to a funeral. You've wasted 30 years. You've wasted millions of tons of resources, and you've left your children less resources and more toxics in the form of the ash that you left in the incinerator. It's inflexible and stifles innovation. This is a statement from Ludwig Kramer, who was the head of the European Union Waste Division for a while. He says an incinerator needs to be fed for about 20 to 30 years, and in order to be economic, needs an enormous input from quite a region. So for 20 to 30 years, you stifle innovation, you stifle alternatives, just in order to feed that monster which you built. You have to feed the monster. Now, right now, Germany, Sweden, Norway, and the Netherlands are all having to import waste from other countries to feed their incinerators. Because meanwhile, their populations are doing what the, quote, experts said we would never do. That we would never take the time to separate and reuse and recycle and compost. Well, guess what? People are not stupid, and they are doing it. But meanwhile, their big burners are not getting enough waste. Incinerators produce a toxic ash, and of course, the process does not get rid of landfills. For every 4 tons of waste you burn, you get at least 1 ton of ash, which nobody wants. Now, just so that you know what we're talking about here, 90% of this ash falls through the grates of your furnace. That's what we call bottom ash. And 10% of your ash is what you hope your expensive air pollution control equipment is capturing. That's fly ash, and that is very toxic. And if it's not very toxic, then you've got a lousy incinerator. Those very toxic metals are going up the stack. Now, to give you some idea of why these are so expensive, half the money today, when you build an incinerator, is going into this part alone. Half the capital cost of an incinerator is air pollution control devices. Okay? So think of an incinerator as 3 boxes. In the first box, you take a lot of solid waste and convert it to gases and tiny particles. Then you build a second box which attempts desperately to capture all those gases and tiny particles. And then the third box is, having captured these tiny particles, you then put it into an ash landfill. If you don't build the first box, you don't need box number 2 or box number 3. Gasification produces, this is a difference between gasifying incinerators and conventional incinerators. As I said, conventional incinerators produce an ash, a bottom ash. But gasification produces a char, and a plasma arc incineration produces a vitrified slag. And in Japan, they are using plasma arc incinerators to vitrify the ash produced by conventional incinerators because of the landfill issue. When you've got it vitrified, it doesn't leach the metals into the groundwater. But they all these facilities, whether you're talking about conventional or gasifying incinerators, produce fly ash and other products from the filters. And this fly ash, as I've said, is very toxic. Now, in Germany and Switzerland, they put the fly ash into nylon bags and then put the nylon bags into salt mines, the same way they handle low-level radioactive waste in Germany and Switzerland. In Denmark, beautiful, clean, green Denmark, have a wonderful solution. They send all their ash to Norway, both the bottom ash and the fly ash. And in the UK, the fly ash goes to landfills. Well, here's a landfill, hazardous waste landfill accepting fly ash. This landfill is located between the River Severn and the Cotswolds, the hills in the background of the Cotswolds. If you know England, this is a beautiful part of the country, contaminated by this operation. Now, the people living in those houses, one of them is interviewed in that movie Trashed by Jeremy Irons. And she is obviously concerned about that fly ash getting into their houses, their gardens, their kids. But the British government said, you no need to worry. You no need to worry because the fly ash can't get out of this facility. Doesn't get out. And the citizens, lovely people, did their research and they found this. This is a 40-mile-an-hour road sign, and it's covered in ash. Well, it may come as a shock to you, but they don't have roadways inside this landfill. This is outside the landfill. And so the British government said, awfully sorry. Awfully sorry, we made a mistake. Your children are breathing that shit, and it is getting into your houses and gardens, and awfully sorry about that. In the United States, the EPA, under Carol Browner, they thought the EPA would get greener under Browner, but it got browner, gave away the House. The Supreme Court rules that ash from incinerators had to be tested, and if it tested hazardous, it had to be sent to a hazardous waste facility. But they left the EPA to determine how the testing was going to be done, and that was the giveaway. The giveaway was to allow the industry to mix the bottom ash and the fly ash together, even though they're produced in different parts of the plant, before they tested it. So not only do you have a dilution factor of 10-1 with the fly ash and the bottom ash, but the fly ash actually protects the bottom ash from the failure because it makes it alkaline, and the alkali interferes with the testing. And so all the ash from American incinerators, even though before this it was testing hazardous, fly ash was testing hazardous 100% of the time, and bottom ash was testing hazardous about 40% of the time. Now the combined ash is passing, it's going to regular landfills. In some places it's used as landfill cover, or it goes into combined ash landfills. To give you some idea of the scale, this is the combined ash landfill in Haverhill, Massachusetts, which is on the banks of the river. I'm trying to remember the river that goes through Haverhill.
It's the Merrimack.
Merrimack, you got it. The Merrimack River. A monster. Monstrosity. So, argument number 7, incinerators put many highly toxic and persistent substances into the air. The first thing that we're concerned about is acid gases. And the big acid gas is hydrogen chloride, and that makes it complicated for the industry because hot hydrogen chloride eats through metals like you wouldn't believe. So there's a lot of replacement costs. Hydrogen fluoride, which concerns me, but doesn't concern many other people. And nitrogen oxides. Nitrogen oxides are interesting because when they are produced, they're neutral. And so you can't use the cheap acid scrubbers that will remove HCl and sulfur dioxide. You've got to use things like ammonia or urea injected into the gas to convert the nitrogen oxides back to nitrogen. Very expensive. Then the second, what you're concerned about here, by the way, is that in combination with particulate, the acid gases probably explain the increased incidence of asthma, asthmatic attacks near some incinerators. Not all incinerators, but at least some incinerators have reported high incident rates of asthma. And when those are reported, you know that you're dealing with a lousy incinerator. Now, we also know that particulates cause many health problems. In urban areas, you can relate both mortality and morbidity increases to the particulate levels, and Denver would be a classic case because you're surrounded by mountains like Los Angeles, so you probably have high incidence of respiratory morbidity. And the other thing is that the smaller the particles, the stronger that relationship is. So if you're a big city and you have particulate in the air, the smaller you measure, the scientists measure, the stronger that relationship with sickness and death. Now the next category is toxic metals. I'm sure I don't have to tell you that toxic metals are elements. They cannot be destroyed in a chemical process like incineration. And that means that any metals that go in have got to come out. They either come out into the air, which is very bad, or they come out in the ash, which means you've got to be very careful with what you do with the ash. The concerns with these toxic metals is that lead, mercury, and arsenic are all known to be neurotoxic. And the concern there is that when young children are exposed there. And you should be aware that toxicologists are saying there is no safe level of lead and probably no safe level of mercury. And so even though you may be dealing with small quantities, you still got the problem of which children, get the particles into their lungs and into their bloodstream. Another thing which is hardly ever discussed, but it is in my judgment that with the advent of the modern incinerator, this is the first time that under normal circumstances, ordinary people have been exposed to airborne, breathable aluminium. You say aluminum. That's because the Alcoa had a spelling mistake in the early 1900s. They printed 20,000 copies of their letterhead with this spelling mistake without the I. And so from now on, Americans, like sheep, have said aluminum. Whereas if you're British, you say aluminium. But in this case, we're right. You look at the elements: lithium, sodium, potassium, rubidium, calcium, magnesium, strontium, barium, aluminum. But I know you're feeling awful now, so to cheer you up, the Brits get another word completely wrong, and you got it right. We talk about vitamins. In Australia and New Zealand, they talk about vitamins. Have you had your vitamins? It's vitamins. The Yanks are right, vitamins, because it comes from vital amines. That was the origin of the word. Okay, so I'm concerned about that because we do have some indication that aluminum is related to dementia, maybe Alzheimer's disease. It's not necessarily causes it, but it seems to be related to the process of dementia. And finally, in the burning process itself, we produce a whole thousands of new compounds, which include the most toxic substances that we've ever made in a chemical laboratory, that most of us heard from Agent Orange and from accidents like Seveso in Italy, the dioxins. Now, a few words about dioxins. Now, dioxins accumulate in animal fat. And this is a paper that we wrote in 1987, Tom Webster and I. We calculated that 1 liter of cow's milk gives you the same dose of dioxin as you would get if you stood next to the cow in the field and breathed the air for 8 months. So you don't need to live near the incinerator, just eat the food that's produced near an incinerator. And this was essentially confirmed by a German research group in 1995. They calculated that in one day, a grazing cow puts into its body the equivalent of 14 years of human breathing. 14 years. So you see the stack of an incinerator is often very tall. And people look at that and say dispersion, dilution. But what they haven't been told is that grazing animals, sheep, cows, goats, pigs, chicken, will reconcentrate these fat-soluble substances. And similarly, fish do the same thing. Now, the next part of this horrible story is that when the dioxins go into our body, the liver, which normally converts in the first stage of detoxification, it normally converts fat-soluble invading molecules into water-soluble. And once you've done that, the kidney can excrete them. But in this case, the liver cannot convert dioxins, PCBs, etc., into water-soluble products. And so these fat-soluble chemicals have only one place to go, into your body fat. And for the man, you can't get rid of them. I mean, these things accumulate over our lifetime. The good news for us is there's not much evidence that even a lifetime exposure to background levels of dioxin has caused any visible harm to men, even with a lifeline accumulation. But the problem gets hairy when you look at what a woman can do. A woman can get rid of dioxins by having a baby. So she stores up the dioxin in her body fat for 20, 25, 30 years. She has the baby. And then in the 9 months, the dioxin moves from her fat to the tiny fetus. And so now the effective concentration of the dioxin is huge. And that's where the problems come, in the developing fetus. And so the highest doses are going to the developing, into the fetus. And now the last part of the story is that dioxins interfere with hormones. And hormones regulate infant and fetal development. And dioxins interfere with 6 different hormones, including sex hormones and thyroid hormones. The thyroid hormone can interfere with mental development, and the sex hormones obviously can interfere with sexual development. There's a brilliant book written by Thea Coburn, who died last year, Our Stolen Future. Our Stolen Future. And you see this in nature. I don't know a huge amount of biology, I'm a chemist, but I always thought that sex was determined by the XY chromosome, and it is. Sex is determined genetically by the XY chromosome. But to the extent that your maleness or femaleness is expressed depends upon hormonal control. And so if you mess around with these male and female sex hormones, then females will develop masculine characteristics, males will develop female characteristics. And this is so clearly demonstrated in nature. Okay, and then the last horrible twist of the story is both the toxic metals and the dioxins are coming out largely on nanoparticles. These nanoparticles are less than 1 micron in diameter, 1 micron. And here we get into something which is extraordinary. They don't regulate nanoparticles from incineration. There's no regulation of nanoparticles. They regulate the standard regulations of a 10 micron particles, or that could go down to 2.5, but they are not regulating nanoparticles. They're not monitoring nanoparticles. And as you'll see in a moment, we have every reason to be concerned about these particles. As I said before, this relationship between disease and death and air particulate levels, particularly in cities, relates very strongly to the size of the particles we measure. And nanoparticles are going to be even smaller than these, and so we can expect far worse than we're seeing with these particles. So the nanoparticles are not efficiently, they're so tiny, they're not efficiently captured by air pollution control devices. They travel long distances. They remain suspended for long periods of time. That will be particularly true when you've got inversions like Denver. And they go deep down into our lungs. And not just deep down in our lungs. They are so tiny that they squeeze between the proteins and the lipids which make up the membrane. There is no defense in this membrane to capture these particles. They're straight through into the bloodstream. They are then distributed to every tissue in the body, including, in this particular case, the brain. That's a particle in the brain which contains lead, barium, chromium, iron, and silicon. And we don't know much more than that. All we know right now is that scientists are finding these particles in every tissue in the body. There's a very fine article written about how these particles are formed in incineration and gasification in environmental health perspectives, and a brilliant 30-page essay summarizing this whole issue by Vivian Howard, a close friend of mine from England, now Northern Ireland. And as far as I know, this 30-page essay has never been responded to by government. There's never been a scientific response to this essay. And if you want a copy of that, I can give it to you. Or if you're watching this on videotape, that address at the bottom will allow you to contact Vivian and ask him for a copy of that statement on nanoparticles. In 1999, he and a colleague wrote a book on ultrafine particles, which we now call nanoparticles. So the arguments against a gasification. Now, because of the extreme unpopularity of incinerators with the public, they've never wanted to use the name incineration, because the moment you say incineration, the public goes, we don't want incineration. So right from when I got involved in 1995, they called them resource recovery facilities. They had the great help of George Orwell in coming up with these names. And then waste to energy, if you're in England, energy from waste, and in France, valorization, thermal valorization, or if you're in Italy, thermal valorizzazione. But don't use the word incinerator. Now, there's a family of closely related technologies that have been introduced into the market. They're called gasification, pyrolysis, and plasma arc facilities. All claim not to be incinerators. However, all involve a two-stage process. Stage 1, the solid waste is converted into a gas. Stage 2, the second stage, the gas is burned. And the EPA calls them staged incinerators. And in some cases, the second stage is very close to the first stage. Many gasification plants which are being promoted actually look almost identical to a dual chamber mass burn incinerator. Now, a more accurate name then for these facilities would be a gasifying incinerator, a pyrolyzing incinerator, a plasma arc gasifying incinerator. So the zoo is making or wants to run a gasifying incinerator. Now, we now move into the area of distinguishing the PR hype and the reality of this business. The following slides are taken from slide presentation by Green Action, which is a group in near San Francisco, and they document the dismal track record of this industry. It's littered with failed projects and bankruptcies. Here's a few examples. But first, the rhetoric. They put out this report called Incinerators in Disguise, this Green Action, with Gaia, the Global Alliance for Incineration Alternatives. Okay. Claims, pollution-free, zero emissions, proven to be safe, zero waste, a new way to recycle, waste is a renewable energy, not incineration, alternative to landfills. I suspect they've said every single thing like that about this zoo incinerator. One of the companies that was pushing these things in the 1990s was a company called Thermoselect, and they made the mistake of building one in Karlsruhe, Germany, and within a few years, having failed to deliver, burn the amount of waste they said they were going to burn, having failed their emission standards, they have now demolished that facility. It was closed down and has since been demolished. Another company that went around the world called Bright Star, claiming miracles for its technology, was built in Wollongong. I went to see that facility. They wouldn't let me in. I asked for the dioxin emissions, the data. They wouldn't give that to me either. But that facility, again, only operated for a few years before it was closed down. It no longer exists. And then another facility that got a lot of publicity was the Plasgo Plasma Arc Incinerator. It was built near Ottawa, which is only about an hour and a quarter from where I used to live, in Canton, New York. Tremendous razzmatazz. It got the support from the Ottawa mayor and the council, and they started to try to build these things in Vancouver, British Columbia, and in Los Angeles, and in Lucca, in Italy. But meanwhile, their plants never operated for more than a few days at a time. It produced very, very little energy, and it exceeded the emission standards. Here's something I got from the record, from an activist in the area. It was permitted to operate for 1,100 days. It only operated for 272 days, so it only operated 25% of the permitted time. In 2014, its last year, it operated for 74 days. That was only 20% of the permitted time, and only burnt 75 tons per day, which is only 30%. Oh, sorry, it's permitted to burn 75 tons, only burnt 23 tons, i.e. 30%. And it is now declared bankruptcy, Plasco Energy. I think the comments from a leading Swedish combustion engineer, I got this in an email in June of 2013. His name is Håkan Rylander. He's one of the leading combustion engineers in the world. I won't bother you with his qualifications. This is what he said. I think he's very candid. He says, I remember when I joined the business in the 1970s that there was a big belief that gasification, pyrolysis, and the plasma technology would be the salvation of the waste problem. A number of companies introduced gasification and pyrolysis technologies, just slightly different from each other. All the different methods had worked in a very good way when testing them in a small scale, feeding the reactors with a small, very well prepared amount of waste each time. The problems came when scaling up the technology. A number of plants were built in Europe and a number of efforts were done to successfully scale up the technology. However, it didn't work anywhere unless you had a very, very homogeneous input of fuel to the reactors. And he goes on, waste is not a homogeneous fuel. It has so far turned out to be too heterogeneous to be able to treat in a gasification or pyrolysis process, irrespective of how you pre-treat the waste. It is absolutely not applicable for mixed MSW with today's technology. Another very negative factor is that the energy balance very often has turned out to be negative. So in this case, unlike trash incinerators, which burn, you just put the trash in, light a match and it burns, they have to use fuel to gasify the solid, first of all. And if you're using plasma arcs, they take a lot of energy. So by the time you've calculated how much energy you've got back, and you looked at how much energy you've spent making that fuel, you may be in a negative balance. It would, from an environmental point of view, be an excellent method if it worked. With low emissions, with very small and environmentally safe residue, this is particularly the vitrified ash. But unfortunately, the situation today and the experiences are the same today as almost 40 years ago, even if there have been and still are efforts to introduce gasification and pyrolysis into the market. As I say, this is not an enemy of incineration, but it's a candid view of this twist in the technology. Now the arguments against the Denver Zoo project. First of all, from the best that we can ascertain, because the whole thing has been very secretive, it's supposed to be trade secrets, it's a commercial operation. They claim that they're going to build these things in many other places. I don't know why a non-profit organization like a zoo is harboring commercial plans like this to the point that they're not able to tell the public what they're actually doing. I just don't find that defendable. I think you should ask questions about the Denver Zoo Foundation. Are you really allowed to do what you're doing using tax-exempt funding to start a commercial operation? But that's another story. So what we know is that this is a downdraft gasifier, that the syngas that's produced is not burnt directly, which it is in some constellations, but is first cooled and then cleaned in a series of filters of one kind, scrubbers and filters, and then the cleaned gas is burnt in an engine, microturbine or whatever it's called, engine. And they will tell you that this coming out of here will be very, very clean. Obviously, a lot hinges on how good their air pollution control devices are, and also what they do with the sludges and the filter ash. But there's something else that you should know. Between the syngas being produced and going through the air pollution control devices and the cooling, there's a stack. And that stack is to vent or flare the syngas during startup, shutdown, and if there's a blockage in this facility. Obviously, if you get a blockage here, or for some reason the fan's not working or the engine's not working, then you're going to get an explosion. You're going to get a build-up of pressure. So you've got to have a way of releasing that pressure, and that's the vent. Now, with the vented gas, you're getting no air pollution control, and if you flare it, you're getting very poor burnout of your stuff. So that's roughly what the technology looks like. Here are some comments from an Energy and Environmental Research Center. Again, Joan sent this to me, so you can get the exact place where you can get it. They say biomass is gasified in a downdraft gasifier, which is then wet scrubbed to condense tars and reduce syngas temperature for the internal combustion engine. A series of filters is used to reduce particulates before the engine generator. Okay? Continue. The system is simple and has worked to produce power from syngas for more than 50 years. However, even after half a century of development, key techno-economic barriers have yet to be resolved that would make it commercially viable. What are those barriers? The first is environmental. While downdraft gasifiers produce the lowest amount of tars of all gasifier types, they still produce tars. These have to be scrubbed out, or they eventually plug up the piping. The problem is that scrubbing the tars does not get rid of them. It produces a tarry effluent, much like oily water, that must be disposed of. Oftentimes, this can be a deal breaker for a small commercial entity hoping to convert its waste wood into power. Okay. This is from another report. Tar derived from biomass gasification or pyrolysis will be condensed as temperature is lower than its dew point, then block and foul process equipments, the fuel lines, filters, engines, and turbines. Okay, now that's another independent expert. Now this is from the people that are designing this product at the zoo. DZF, Denver Zoo Foundation. DZF's initial assessment is that tar is a major obstacle in gasifier technologies. Even in downdraft gasifier designs, the output of tar is below 1%. Despite this low throughput, these levels lead to mechanical and operational issues such as pipe clogging and mechanical fouling. So they know the problem. All right. Many strategies have been investigated to reduce tar content. Sergio Saccio, it must be a Japanese company, conducted a review of gasifier applications and the implementation of technologies and discusses process pathways to reduce overall tar content. Okay, so what do they plan to do? DZF plans to capture tars using wet scrubbing techniques that will reintroduce the output tar into the gasifier through integration with solid fuel, wood and straw. DZF estimates that approximately 64 pounds an hour of tars and scrubbing liquid, each comprising a total rate of 50% by weight. So what I see here is they're going to take this scrubbing liquor, which is these tars and water, and then pour it on top of wood chips and solid fuel, wood and straw, and feed it back into the incinerator. That's their solution. Now, what that means to me is that it's an ongoing experiment. In other words, they're talking about design changes which they've never done anywhere before. So the arguments against this zoo gasifying incinerator is, one, the planners have never built, owned, or operated such a facility before, anywhere. Never done it before, so they're completely new to this. If you like, they're amateurs. They're rank amateurs. Two, experts in the field are candid about the continuing problems with this technology. The planners are offering some solutions to some of the problems of tar removal and disposal, but in this sense, the project can only be considered as an ongoing experiment. And in my view, you should not be conducting such experiments in a residential area or near exotic animals that may be super sensitive to some of the air pollutants. This is not the place to run experiments. What they should do, in my view, is take the equipment that they've got, put it in packing cases, and come to a deal with the university. And they could be part of the research team that troubleshoots this in a laboratory situation, which is what many other companies have to do. Emissions, I'm concerned about the emissions from the emergency vent. Now, you could say, well, if it's zoo-doo, it's not going to be necessarily very, very toxic, but they're talking about burning paper and stuff, plastics, from the zoo. And I'm sure they'll tell us we have very, very tight control over the plastics that we use in this zoo. But some of that waste is going to come from the customers. Who knows whether those customers toss out batteries into the trash stream or take wrappings which contain aluminum foil or plastic, PVC plastic. You know, you get a lot of the wrap, the saran wrap, is it, that they wrap around food from supermarkets, that's 78% chlorine. So just having a few customers taking in sandwiches, eating the sandwiches and throwing the plastic into the trash container introduces a source of chlorine, which would then produce dioxins. And in a venting situation, you would release those directly into the environment. Same with the toxic metals. And if you flared it, then that's a poor combustion, and some of the organics will be converted into dioxin, into the flare itself. Fires. You've got a lot of combustible material, wood, a straw, a tar, in a small confined area. You have to be concerned about fires. And fires in a zoo could be horrendous. And there have been fires, Joan. You've got examples of fires in gasification plants. So, in my view, no risk is acceptable if it's avoidable. And finally, there are better alternatives that are more sustainable and safer with a proven track record. And I'm talking here about anaerobic digestion to produce methane. So if you still want to hang on to producing a fuel, then the simpler way to do it, and we have farms around the world, we have hotels in India, and we have rag pickers in India able to convert organic waste into biogas. So it's not a revolutionary technique. And so that's a proven technology producing energy. And then if you don't need the energy, you could compost the zoo-doo. They're doing that in Seattle Zoo. I visited the Seattle Zoo in 1987. They had a program there called Zoo-doo. And we'd made a videotape called Zoo-doo and You Can Too, which talked about the Seattle program and how you can compost in your backyard. I have a copy of that video with me, but I'm frightened of time. So we'll hold that in abeyance. I can't leave it with you, but I don't know. We will find out something. Does anybody know how to take a videotape and save it? You can do it, okay. Because I've got it, so I'm my only copy in the world. I don't want to lend it. Okay. So changing gears, even if you made incineration safe, you would never make it this a sensible solution for the 21st century. The modern incinerator is attempting to perfect a bad idea. Our task in the 21st century is not to find better ways to destroy discarded materials. Our task is to stop making packaging and products that have to be destroyed. And that's the central message of zero waste. So the waste problem is not going to be solved with magic machines, with better technology. It's going to be solved with better organization, better education, and better industrial design. And the 10 steps now, the 10 steps to zero waste, shows how all these things, the better organization, better education, better industrial design, will solve this problem. As quickly as I can, step 1, source separation. These 10 things make waste by mixing. They separate waste into resources with separation. Step 2, door-to-door collection. Many different ways that this is going on. In San Francisco, they have 3 containers one for the recyclables, one for the compostables, one for the residuals. They're picked up once a week. In Italy, they have a different system. They have the same trucks picking up different materials on different days. On Mondays, they pick up the organics. On Tuesday, the mixed recyclables, and so on. Step 3 is composting. There's a hierarchy. With organics, the first thing we need to do is to feed people. If we can't feed people, feed animals. If we can't feed animals, feed the soil. We need healthy soil to produce healthy food, to produce healthy people, not Monsanto's concocted crap. Composting and vermiculture hierarchy. We need to do it in our backyards if we can, even on our window boxes if we can. Or on site, there are small-scale composting facilities, Swedish, which you can compost, any institution's waste in the basement. Odorless. Community compost. In Zurich, Switzerland, they have 1,000 community composting facilities run by the citizens. They are handling 50% of the organic waste produced domestically. On farms, we need to involve our farmers in zero waste. And at last, if you don't have any of that, or to back up that, you need a centralized facility, which could be anaerobic digestion. So you can tap into the energy content and still have a fertilizer at the end with the nitrogen and phosphorus there. Now, in San Francisco, they know that they've got to get the organics clean because it's going to be used by farmers. And so the restaurants, it's 25% cheaper for them to put out clean organics than mixed waste. So economic incentive. Secondly, the municipality sends out people to educate the kitchen staff to make sure they know exactly what needs to go in those containers. There's the composting facility. It's about 70 miles from San Francisco. It's surrounded by farmland. The farmers are using the compost to grow fruit and vegetables, which go back to San Francisco, and 200 vineyards are using the compost. Step 4, recycling, again in San Francisco. The facility is on Pier 96, close up, separation lines. Now, the way they've got constructed this in San Francisco is fantastic. One company has the contract for pickup. They pick up the 3 containers. One truck picks up the green waste and takes it to the composting facility. The other truck is split down the middle. That picks up the residual, the black container and the blue container, and the recyclables. And the recyclables go to this facility. And the company owns the composting facility and the recycling facility, but doesn't own the landfill. So they have no incentive to send anything to landfill. It's beautiful. And lastly, the whole company called Recology is owned by the workers themselves. It's an owner-owned company. So they have a huge stake in making this work. Step 5, the reuse and repair centers, which we hope to be community centers. Remember, reusable objects are low volume, high value. Low volume. In Los Angeles, only 2% of the total, but worth over a third of the value. That means if you harness these products, you can make money and you can create jobs, which they've been doing for 30 years in Berkeley, California. Urban Ore, it's been running for 30 years, $3 million grossing a year, 37, not 27, 37 full-time jobs. When you go in, it's like a shopping mall for used goods. Special areas for building materials, that's a high-value item. Doors here. And over in Vermont, they take people off the street and train them to repair things. Large appliances, small appliances, electrical goods, and computers. And after 9 months, they give them a certificate and help them to get a job. So we're not just talking about recovering materials. We're talking about recovering people here. In addition, they're linked to a deconstruction company, which is taking down old barns, churches, etc. They're recovering a lot of materials, and some of those materials are being converted into beautiful furniture. So you're getting value-added entities as well. You can have fun with this. They don't have a lot of fun in Sweden. They don't have much sunshine. But they do have fun in Gothenburg with this eco park, this reuse park. It's a large area. And when you go in, there's a band playing. And when you're walking around, there are clowns to entertain the kids. And when you go to the toilet, it's an art gallery. You can sit there pooping and choosing the painting that you want to buy. But my favorite fun maker is this dog. This dog, this amazing dog, can separate mixed recyclables into 6 different categories. Now, if a dog in Sweden can separate into, well, I won't go on now, you can catch the drift. And this is this very creative bureaucrat, Paul Martinson, a very wonderful guy. He's now going around the world talking about this. He's giving his T-shirt to the King of Sweden at the Rio conference. One-stop shopping. A guy called Eric Lombardi from EcoCycle down the road in Boulder, Colorado, who successfully, for many years, ran their recycling program in Boulder. He says one of the problems is that when we're trying to get cities to go zero waste, the cities put out a contract for people to handle the waste, usually the whole waste stream. So the people that bid on this are the people that have got the money to handle the whole waste stream, the incinerator companies and the landfill companies. But the little recyclers and reusers and composters, they don't have the money or the ability to handle the whole waste stream. So what he's suggesting is that we build these gigantic reuse parks and form consortia out of recyclers, reusers, composters, and construction demolition debris. And so together, maybe they can put in a bid for a zero waste program, which would operate at such a facility. So this facility would have a materials recovery facility, like we saw in San Francisco, a center for hard-to-recycle materials, which he's developed in Boulder, reuse and repair center, composting facility with the surrounding area, and construction and demolition debris, the residual screening and research center built at the very end. So he's very close to you, and maybe Denver would be the first place to build one of these great reuse and eco zero waste park. Now, we've got to step 5. Now we go to step 6. We have to minimize the residual fraction. Step 6, economic incentives. Compostables for free, taken for free, no surcharge on the recyclables, but the residual fraction, there is a surcharge. The more you make, the more you pay. In Capanari in Italy, they use a microchip in a bag. And they only charge you when you put the bag out. So if you save your residual for several weeks because you're not making many, you save money. And in Seattle, Washington, you can choose what size residual container that you want to use. But the trick is, the bigger you choose, the more money you pay each month. Step 7, economic incentives. More material reduction. In Ireland, the government put a 15-cent tax on plastic shopping bags. Nobody believed it was going to happen, but they reduced the use of those bags by 92% in 1 year. In California, last October, Governor Brown signed in a ban on single-use plastic bags. In Ontario, Canada, they've been using glass beer bottles, reusable bottles, for over 60 years. They recover 98% of the bottles. Each bottle goes around 18 times. It saves the company money. There's 2,000 jobs involved in collecting and cleaning these bottles. In the schools in Italy, Capanari, this is Rossano Ercolini, my school teacher friend. They've taken all the plastics out, glass, stainless steel, and ceramics, and they're using tap water, not bottled water, and they've got zero waste babies. The babies, eco-bimbi, reusable diapers, not throwaway diapers. Going beyond 80% diversion. We can get up to 80% with those first 7 steps. To get closer to zero waste, we need a residual separation facility. They built them in Nova Scotia. They're built in front of the landfill. There it is. Notice that the trucks carrying the residuals cannot dump straight into the landfill. They can only dump into the residual facility. Everything is screened, which helps to keep the mafia out of your landfill. So there's the residual screening facility up front. The bags come in, the bags are open, the contents go on conveyor belts. Paid workers pull up more recyclables, more toxics. The dirty organic fraction is not touched. It goes all the way to the end of the conveyor belt and then is shredded. And the shredded material goes into long troughs. Each day it's turned material is aerated and shifted. In total, it's composted for 18 days before it goes out into the curing area, before eventually it goes into the landfill as landfill cover. So the object of this exercise is not to produce a compost to sell because it's dirty, but to stabilize it above ground before it creates methane, etc., underground. And that's what it looks like at the end. Into this, we need to put the Zero Waste Research Center to study the non-recyclable fraction. We need to draw upon our local universities and technical colleges, professors and students who are interested in sustainability, industrial design, maybe advertising, all kinds of things. But get their hands dirty. This is their laboratory for sustainability. And this is where community responsibility and industrial responsibility come face to face. And the message to industry is if we can't reuse it, if we can't recycle it, or if we can't compost it, then industry shouldn't be making it. We need better industrial design for the 21st century. Zero waste is a design. Waste is a design problem. Nature makes no waste. We make waste. It's a human invention, and we've got to de-invent it. And that brings in the fourth R. The 3 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle, this, which includes compost, that's community responsibility. We need the fourth R, redesign. That's industrial responsibility. So in one page, there's zero waste. It's a combination of community responsibility, the 3 R's plus composting, and industrial responsibility, redesign. Step 9, better industrial design. Step 10 is the landfill, which we hope to use less and less. Now, a little bit of progress on the zero waste research. In 2010, Kapaneri, that's Rossano's hometown, here's Rossano looking through the trash, starting the research effort. Here's Patricia and Trapani doing the same in Sicily. And they've analyzed what's in the residual fraction. Top of the list, textiles and leather. Second, panolini. Panolini? Diapers. Don't make that mistake. Or kitchen waste. Well, kitchen waste says we need more education. People are putting it in the wrong container. Textiles and leather, they're now collecting separately because they obviously see that has a value. And the diapers, I've already explained, has triggered a local company making reusable diapers, and the pharmacies are giving away the first reusable diaper to new parents. Now, another thing that they're finding in the residual fraction, these wretched plastic coffee capsules, Lavazza. You know, you put this plastic thing in a machine, press a button, you get a beautiful cup of coffee. I must admit, it's good. But so does Julia Roberts likes it too, apparently. But there's thousands and thousands of these bloody things are ending up in landfills. And there's some more examples. And what Rossano did is he wrote a letter to Lavazza and said, look, we're a zero-waste city. We're up to 83% diversion. But we keep finding your plastic coffee capsules in our trash. What can you do about it? Well, to their amazement, they got a phone call back from Lavazza a couple of days later, wanting to meet up, their experts with our experts, which they did. And I'm happy to tell you that a couple of months ago, Lavazza announced that they had produced a capsule which was reusable, which would go into the same machines. And incidentally, so is their competitor. So, you know, they had reason to do it. So there's the 10 steps again. What I like about this, once again, it begins with everybody, and it involves a lot of people in between, farmers, restaurant workers, etc., and some very creative people, and people that know something about economics. But by the time we get down to steps 8 and 9, we're tapping into the brightest minds in our society. Our university professors and students, and our industrial designers. Reminds me, the first person to talk about zero waste in the world, Leonardo da Vinci. In 1500, he wrote, "There's no such thing as waste." So we need our brightest minds. Isn't it great that instead of putting money into big machines to destroy resources, we put money into our universities to tap into these creative, bright minds? And we need to do that because we need to link our zero waste successes with other aspects of sustainability, sustainable agriculture, sustainable architecture, etc., etc., etc. So I think it's going to be very, very difficult for this planet to really become sustainable. But the thought of doing that without a wholehearted effort from our universities and from our industries is just mind-boggling. The historians will be amazed, will be absolutely amazed. You mean to tell me in the middle of the 21st century, when you knew that you're just heading for a completely non-sustainable future, you didn't mobilize your universities big time, that every university department should be enforced to explain how their discipline relates to sustainability? You don't leave this to sustainability experts. Everybody has to be an expert on sustainability if this planet or life on this planet is going to survive. So how close have we got to zero waste? San Francisco is up to 80% diversion by 2011. Their goal for 2020 is zero waste. Flanders, which is the Flemish-speaking part of Belgium, 6 million people, 73% diversion. Italy, over 1,000 communities getting 70% diversion, over 300 getting 80% diversion, some getting 90% diversion. And they're reaching these goals very quickly. Salerno in Italy went from 18% to 72% in 2 years. And just recently, Parma in Italy got to 70% diversion in 7 months. 7 months! Campania is the first town in Italy to declare a zero-waste strategy. I was there for the party with the Vino Rosso. There's the mayor of Campania and Rossano. And very, very important for these programs to be successful, we need the local politicians to work closely with the activists. We're on the same side on this one. And now over 200 communities in Italy have declared a zero-waste strategy, and it's leading Europe in this. So summarizing, this plan is better for the economy, more jobs, more small businesses. It's better for our health, less toxics. It's better for our universities, more meaning, more relevance. It's better for the planet, it's more sustainable, and it's better for our children because it offers them more hope for the future. Remember, it's an agenda that begins with the simple act of using these 10 things to separate on a daily basis, and it ends with a concrete stepping stone towards sustainability, the big picture. And finally, more hope. 3 final messages, and Joan, you must have heard me talk about this in 1988. The 3 final messages. The first, to citizens, don't let the experts take your common sense away. They will if they can, because they get paid to do it. To politicians, put your faith back in people. Stop trying to solve your social problems with magic machines. And finally, to activists, have fun. We've got to enjoy this. It's going to be a struggle. It's going to be tough. But we also have to enjoy it. And the way you enjoy it is what you're starting to experience tonight. You meet other people. You do what we should be doing, living with other people, working with other people, having fun with other people, struggling with other people for a good cause. That's very exciting, and I have this every day of my life. And I keep going because I have a little song. And this is the only song that I'm not too embarrassed to sing in public. You know, the English embarrass far too easily. The Americans don't embarrass too easily enough. But I'm learning. So here's the song. It's the Battle Hymn of Garbage. Whilst we recognize our landfills all are swelling with the waste that doesn't justify a bad decision made in haste, let us put our heads together so the problem may be faced, and we must do it now. We don't want incineration. We don't want incineration. We don't want incineration. We know there's a better way. Mine eyes have seen the garbage that's a smouldering on the grate. We must stop incineration before it is too late. Unless we wish the dangers, we had better separate, and we must do it now. We don't want
incineration. We don't want incineration. We don't want incineration.
We know there's a better way. Thank you very much.